Welcome back, everybody, to our Higher Ground series, where today we're going to be talking about the power of connection and networking that changes everything. I'm joined by a woman who truly believes and lives and breathes connection, Helen Nicholson, affectionately known by many people as the networking queen. So Helen's mix of humor, substance, and real world wisdom is gold for our Higher Ground series. She and I will be sharing thought-provoking and interesting conversations to create flow and spark, as well as an opportunity to reflect and be able to deliver practical takeaways for our audience. Our audience of business leaders, recruiters, and other professionals who deal with people on a day-to-day basis. So welcome, Helen. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us today.
Thank you, Nicole. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. So, a little bit more around Helen. So, Helen's story and background. So, she began her career as an accountant, but quickly discovered her real passion for people. She went on to found the networking company where she is now CEO, where she likes to rather be seen as the chief excitement officer, helping professionals develop what she calls the essential power skills for personal branding, networking, and mindfulness. Another exciting thing about Helen is that she's actually an author of 4 best-selling business books, including the international hit Mindfulness, How to Stay Sane in an Insane World, and her newest release, which is Networking for Introverts. So we are really excited to hear so much more about Helen's experience as well as her global experience. So I think let's get straight into it. We feel like Helen truly embodies the values that we hold dear as Red Eye Holborn Group. It's also about building genuine relationships, prioritizing people, and leading with authenticity. And so Helen's background really speaks to what we stand for in our business. So Helen, let's kick off. I'm dying to learn so much more from you today. You've been called the networking queen, as I mentioned. So what does authentic networking mean to you in a world where everyone is connected, but not necessarily connecting?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I think to answer that, I'd like to go and trace back into my history and background. So I grew up in a family where my parents did not know people who knew people. So they were not networked and they were not connected. My mom is a retired school teacher and my dad was a graphic artist. They're both still alive today and they're also more introverted. So they didn't have networks and they were introverted. And so, and I watched as I grew up how much stress that actually caused in their lives. And I remember being about 6 years of age and their roof kept on leaking. And because they didn't have networks, they would consult the old-fashioned yellow pages. I don't know if you probably, Nicole,
Yes.
maybe too young to remember that big brick that Telcom used to drop on our
I do.
doorsteps. And then they would consult and they'd go through and they'd find a service provider to come and fix the roof. And, there was a theme in our house of a lot of love and a lot of independence, but very little money. And it's only much later that I've realized about the power of networks is that there is a link between lack of finances and lack of networks. And
Yeah.
my parents would then get these service providers in to come and fix the roof. And because it wasn't built on personal referrals or recommendations, often they'd have to repeat the repair job, 2 or 3 or 4 times. And they didn't have the money to do that. And I realized, how much stress it actually caused them. And it was only when I went to school, where I went to school with a girl who'd had a father who'd been at one of those boys' schools, where the boys actively help each other and they network and they help each other long after they've actually been at school. And watching that, and being exposed to people who were very good connectors. So I actually much prefer the word connectors to networkers, because networking, there's always a kind of a smarminess.
I was going to say like a stigma around that, right?
Yes. And also that stigma also implies that you are just taking from relationships, when in actual fact, the best connectors, stroke networkers that I know are people who are very generous and who give generously to their networks. So that is the cornerstone. So, if you were to ask me what the biggest, I think the biggest characteristic of the most authentic connectors is that
Mm.
generosity, abundance mentality, and the giving.
I absolutely love that. Sure. It really changes the perspective. It gives it different energy. Like when you call it a connector, it does feel much warmer, more nurturing as opposed to a networker. So I
Indeed.
love how you position that. And I think, again, words give us power and energy. And I think it is so important to look at it from that perspective. So that's interesting, Helen. And I mean, you started as an accountant, right? So what moment or experience led you to pivot into the world of people connection and personal branding?
So I think when I was, I'd studied accounting. I lived in the Middle East for 5 years.
Wow.
And when I came back to South Africa, I worked at Wits Business School. And at that stage, they still had an association with Harvard. And I sat in on a lot of leadership programs. And one of the banks had just done a piece of research on why women and men got to quite senior levels in organizations. And then for some reason, the men overtook the women. And
Mm,
this piece of research indicated that the one factor, the differential between the women and the men, was the difference in the size of their business networks.
yeah.
So women often have very good, personal networks. So we know where the best schools are for our children, where the best doctors are. It's a much more a black book kind of network. Whereas
Yeah.
men, I think, because they've also been doing this for a lot longer, often are very good at that transactional type networking. A guy cannot see each other, or guys cannot see each other for 20 years. And if they need something, they'll pick up the phone and say, "Hey, bud, can you help me with this?" They help each other, they go their separate ways. Whereas women, we get caught up in the whole thing and we think, oh, because I haven't heard from Nicole for 4 months, she's only phoning me only when she needs something. So women are often less, yeah, I think we're not aware of the power of the acquaintance network. And largely networks are a numbers game. The more people you know and you have some system to keep in touch with, the better your network is going to be.
Absolutely love that. There's so much value in it. There's so much value in it. And it's about perspective. So I love that. And I mean, you also describe soft skills as essential power skills. And we spoke a little bit about earlier, you mentioned some skills there, what are quite prominent in people who are connectors. Why do you think they're still undervalued though in many corporate environments, those sort of softer skills?
Yeah, I do think that that is changing. I
Mm.
think, we've built a business on the so-called, I always say soft skills were so soft, then why they're so hard. Um, because they are, you'll meet, I mean, I, for some reason, seem to attract a lot of people after presentations or during workshops. They come up to me and they say, I feel stuck in my career. I'm going
Mm.
round and round in circles. I'm in a cul-de-sac, and often they don't know how to exit that. And
Yeah.
often it's because it's very seldom because of a lack of technical expertise. It's
Mm.
generally because of those soft skills, which are things like your brand, your network, your ability to navigate corporate politics, your presence. Do you
Yeah.
present yourself? Do you know how to influence and impact people? So
Mm.
those are the skills that often are the things that keep people in career cul-de-sacs for a long time.
Yeah. That is so true. And I think also so relevant to our audience who can be people who are job hunting and looking for that next change. And I think a lot of the times they do feel quite stuck and actually still have to find their confidence in order to put themselves forward. So I think that is a whole rediscovery process. But I think soft skills are very attractive when you are interviewing or meeting and greeting. I think it's so important to be warm and approachable. And around career growth and promotion. So you've worked with countless executives. What are some common branding blind spots that you see that hold talented people back?
I can think of two. One is that people over rely on their technical expertise. They'll often say to me, but I do a great job. And then I say, but who knows about this great job that you're doing? So, and that leads into the second point is often I've seen if people leave the development of their personal brand to their line managers, that is a
Mm,
bad strategy. Because sometimes you have amazing line managers who invested in your growth and development, but if you don't, then you're putting all your eggs in that basket. So regardless
yeah,
of whether your line manager is supportive or not, you need to spread the word about what it is that, what value you bring to the organization. And I've often met a lot of people who are more shy or more introverted. And, I interviewed 253 introverts for my last Networking for Introverts book. So I got very in touch with, what it is that they struggle with. And one of the
Yeah.
consistent themes that kept on coming up was, they say, I don't feel comfortable tooting my own horn, or,
Mm.
they don't want to be seen as arrogant and boastful. And, they see other people who influence and impact, and they sometimes think that they, kind of, a schloppy kind of person. I can't think of a better
Yeah.
word
Yeah.
to say it. And my advice then is to do it in a newsy way. So, when you're walking down a corridor and you have an opportunity to grab a coffee with some senior exec, say, I just wanted to keep you up to date with the things that I'm busy with, and make sure the projects that you are working on are communicated, because otherwise some other person can often take the credit,
Cool.
because, the senior people or other stakeholders just didn't know about your involvement. So it is
Mm.
very important to identify who those power brokers are in your network and communicate regularly to them, and don't just let your personal brand rest in the hands of your line manager.
Mm. Those are some really powerful points, Helen. And it's quite funny when I'm prepping my candidates for interviews, I literally say to them, I give you full permission to brag, because when you're interviewing, you need to sell. You need to feel
Yes,
comfortable and
yes,
confident to sell your achievements, your rewards, things that you're proud of throughout your career, even if they seem small to you or small to others. It doesn't really matter. That is part of you. It's your journey and it's your story. And I feel like that's how you connect. So it's so important to feel comfortable. I mean, there's always going to be a fine line between the confidence and the arrogance. And I think it's finding that balance at the end of the day. Um, so, Helen, with regards to like practical ways that professionals can expand their networks authentically, even when
yes.
they're busy or shy or really new in the industry, do you have some tips on how they could do that?
So I encourage people to build a network one coffee at a time. And
Mm.
I encourage people to have a coffee with two interesting people every week. So preferably one internal and one external. So, often people say to me, there's no way I can do that. Like, I can't even get time to have my own coffee. But, this is where we've got to get creative, and they don't have to take up a lot of time,
Mm.
and sometimes this is where your hobbies can actually overlap. You can run and then have a coffee with someone externally, or you can, go to gym, or, sometimes your hobbies, or if you're in a choir or whatever it is. So, and then just make sure that you touch base with interesting people, because one of the things about networks is they become more linear as we get older. So,
Mm.
and I always say to people, your network is not powerful if it's only comprising people who are the same colors, you, the same age as you, the same gender as you, and the same industry as you, because then all you've got is clones of you.
Mhm.
And a network's power is in its diversity. So that's
Mm.
why CEOs who Hell's Angel, or Harley Davidson riders on the weekend, and then,
Mhm.
MDs or CEOs during the week often have very interesting networks, because they're connecting with very different types of people. And I think as we get older, we've got to very deliberately cultivate that. I mean, for example, I knit. People say I
Mhm.
don't look like a knitter, but I like to knit. I find it calms me down in the evening, and it just
Lovely.
takes me off my device. It makes me use two hands, and I find it very therapeutic. So this year I joined a knitting group with a whole lot of much older ladies than me.
Mm.
They're all retired. They're all, and it's amazing the wisdom, and there are people I never would have normally crossed paths with, and I absolutely love my knitting group. So
Okay.
it really is finding those pockets of people who are just so different to you.
That was incredibly valuable. I think again, it also says it talks to there's some sayings around, you are pretty much the total of the five people that you spend the most time with, right? So if you're going to diversify that and spend people from all different walks of life at different ages, doing different things, and I think it really just gives you so much more value, changes your perspective, it just gives you a lot more inspiration as well. and to learn from others. So I think that's also quite important. I mean, you've spoken about introverts, right? So you've written Networking for Introverts. What's the one myth you'd love to bust about introverts and networking?
I think that a lot of people think introverts are shy. And it's not that introverts are shy. Introversion and extroversion is about where you get your energy from. So
Right.
introverts do get energy from people, but one of the most interesting pieces of research I came across when I was researching the book was around the brain science of introversion and
Mm,
extroversion. And what they were saying is that if you imagine we have dopamine receptors in our brain.
mm,
So dopamine is our feel-good chemical. It's what, it makes us kind of come alive. It's what keeps us addicted to social media, because you get a little ping every time, someone likes or shares your posts. But dopamine
yeah.
is a very powerful pleasure hormone. We follow that. And what happens is introverts have actually got more dopamine receptors in their brains than extroverts do. So what
Mm,
that means is that if you imagine a cup, um, so an introvert dopamine cup is actually already three-quarters of full, of when they wake up in the morning. So that's why when
yeah.
they go to a social event, they don't need a lot of stimulation to fill the cup up. I always
Yeah.
say to them, you can meet three people and then you can go home. So like if you want to, hit that event, and introverts need to come out of the starting blocks quickly because they've got this
Mm,
limited amount of energy. So meet your three people, connect with them meaningfully, and then you can go home. Extroverts, on the other hand, their dopamine cup is only kind of a quarter full. So that's why when they go to an event, they need a lot more stimulation to actually fill their dopamine cup. So,
yeah.
and it was so interesting while I was researching this particular part of the book, my husband and I
Mm,
went to a party and I could see we'd had a very social week. I'm an extrovert, he's an introvert. And I could see he was just done. And when we arrived, like he'd only been there for half an hour and he said, I've had enough. I need to go home. And, before I would have been annoyed with him and I would have said, kind of, can't you make an effort? But I actually realized it was a neuroscience issue. His brain was now, his dopamine was full and he had no more capacity. So he
yeah.
ended up going home and I stayed at the party and I had a fabulous time because my dopamine cup was still needing to be filled. So I think
Yeah.
that insight has given both me as an extrovert, and that's why what's been interesting about the Networking for Introverts book is a lot of introverts bought it and then they gave it to their extrovert colleagues, bosses, husbands, wives, and said, understand me better because it
Yes.
does explain it's not a choice. It is actually a neuroscience issue.
Yeah. I think it's quite powerful in, again, understanding your partners or your children or your colleagues when it comes to things like being an introvert or an extrovert. So I'm certain that book is quite powerful and a great tool to use. A lovely gift as well, now that you
Hmm.
brought it up, for others that you feel are in either spectrum. And I mean, also, Helen, you've lived abroad and you've built and you've sold a business and you've raised twins as a single mom. What have those experiences taught you about resilience and reinvention?
So I think bravery is a muscle. I think that's been my biggest lesson. We are not necessarily born brave, but I think the more small, brave things we do, the braver we become. We've
Yeah.
just opened a new leadership training venue here in Joburg about 7 weeks
Yes.
ago called The Edge at the Wanderers Cricket
Amazing.
Stadium. And we've got a room there where there are ice baths and saunas. And,
Okay.
and people are very scared of ice baths specifically, and especially women. And I've got a sign in that room that says you can do hard things. And it's actually that's what that room is about. It's actually the ice plunges and the saunas are the method, but I think when we test ourselves physically. So I ran the New York Marathon in 2011, and I mean I'm not a natural runner, but
Amazing.
what it did for me psychologically was then I thought I can do anything that I put my mind to do. And I think that if we challenge ourselves physically, that makes us braver and more resilient mentally and emotionally.
Mm, that's absolutely amazing. And again, it's such a big thing is these ice baths. I mean, it can be quite scary for some people. I mean, especially if they don't like the thought of cold water, can you imagine an ice bath? But I absolutely love the power behind those mantras as well, because it does it does build your confidence, and it does say that you can, you've got the capacity. And I think you only realize that when you actually put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And I mean, Helen, you've trained and you've met thousands of professionals. What qualities do you most think are magnetic from the people that you've worked with?
Well, I think, I think two things. One is people who have presence.
Mm,
So people who listen well, who pay attention, they really, when I sign people's books, the mindfulness one, I always say the greatest gift you can give anyone is the gift of your attention. And I think in the age of AI, in the age of like all the disruption we're seeing in the tech space, I think your ability to be more human and your ability to give attention to the right things,
yes.
and the right people at the right time, that is going to be one of the key factors that I think is going to distinguish amazing leaders and execs. Because I think a lot of people, everyone's busy. But if you can be busy doing the right things, often I think we run around, just doing a whole lot of stuff, and we're
Mm,
not focused. One of the epiphanies I had when I was researching the mindfulness book was that multitasking is actually one of the worst things we can do. And everyone
oh,
multitasks, and in fact, I used to regard that as like one of my biggest superpowers.
yeah.
But when you look at the brain science of multitasking, our brain is actually a single processing unit. It's not designed. It doesn't, it's the equivalent of having all your tabs on your laptop open, because it immediately
Mm,
slows down the central processing unit. And that's what happens with our brain. And what I'm noticing, and that's why people are so tired. I mean, this is the
yeah.
first year in 2025, I saw people complaining about being overwhelmed and exhausted in
Yeah.
April this year. Normally it starts to happen now in October, but it happened like literally 6 months before it normally happens. And I think
Yeah.
because we've gotten so used to task switching. So people are busy on their laptops, then emails are popping in, then they go, even if you didn't go and open that mail, the fact you saw the
Mm,
subject line and you see who sent it, that will
mm,
distract you from between 8 and 11 minutes. So what we're doing is we're constantly taking our attention somewhere else and then bringing it back, and that is exhausting. Our brain doesn't like it, and it's also not
yeah.
very good at it. So what happens is
Yeah.
we've been very busy, but we're not doing the right stuff, and we actually are quite unproductive, and it makes us very anxious.
Sure. I think you hit the nail on the head, Helen. Definitely guilty as charged. I mean, as you're speaking, I can already see myself doing that on a day-to-day basis. I'm the one with a million tabs open and trying to do a million things at the same time. And so you actually get exhausted a lot quicker. You think that you're being super productive, and you just want to touch on everything as much as you can, but it's really exhausting. And I think it's just going back to doing one task at a time and doing it well, and then moving on to the next, and giving yourself those little slots to get everything
Mm.
done, and be
And
present
switch
for
off
that.
your email notifications, switch off your phone, and just focus. And even if it's just for 30
Yeah.
minutes, but you'll just see how the quality of whatever you're doing in that 30 minutes
Mm,
dramatically improves. There's a great book called Deep Work by a guy called
okay.
Cal Newport, which I consider like one of my top 5 business books of all times. And
Wow.
he's a young, he's probably like mid-30s, I would say, but he's got about 7 degrees. And he just says that he works in these sprints of 90 minutes. And and then everything goes off, works for 90 minutes, and then goes on to the next thing. And I think that what I've observed, especially in the corporate world, is people just sit
Yeah.
in meetings all day. And I think there's no opportunity to actually do the work that you're talking
Yeah.
about in these meetings. And then the only time you have to do the work then is in evenings and weekends. And I
And
do
after.
think we need to relook at that.
Absolutely. And I've heard so many clients or people that I work with that are just saying, I mean, back to back all day. I mean,
Yeah.
where's the opportunity to actually do the work that you love and to be creative if you're just in meetings every day? So spot on, Helen. I think, again, this was so valuable. And again, I think a lot of these tools and the wisdom that you've shared can be utilized in any part of your life. Whether you're in the professional space or building a business, or just working on yourself, doing the whole self-development and reinventing and all of that. So Helen, thank you so much for that amazing valuable information that you've shared with us. And I mean, Helen, how can people get hold of you? How can they get in touch? Website, LinkedIn, maybe you want to share a little bit around that?
Yeah. So they can get in touch with me, Helen Nicholson, on LinkedIn, or network with Helen on Instagram. And then our business is the networking company, tnco.co.za. And yeah, I share regularly on both of those topics on both Instagram and LinkedIn. So those are probably the best places. And my books are both available on Take a Lot, in some exclusive books, and on Amazon.
Amazing, Helen. Thank you so much for your incredible time today. Again, I thoroughly enjoyed learning so many tools from you today. And also, I think just a really good reminder of how we need to actually live our lives and prioritize our days. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to meet with you. And I do wish you continued success in everything that you
Thank you, Nicole.
do. Thanks, Helen.